Crowds love a strong leader in hard times. They cheer when someone promises order, certainty, a hand to take the weight off of their shoulders, and you can almost forgive them. Freedom is heavy. It demands thought, judgment, and courage. Authority, by contrast, feels light. Someone else carries the burden and you get to feel safe. But that's the paradox. Liberty is hard work. Authority is a holiday. That's why so many people trade one for the other. And once you've made that trade, once you've surrendered your freedom for comfort, the cost is far higher than you imagined, and the return policy is brutal. What we'll see is simple and unsettling. Freedom is a burden. Authority is a temptation, and the price of giving in to that temptation is always paid later with interest. Freedom isn't the fairy tale that you were promised. It isn't effortless. It isn't easy. It's heavy because freedom demands responsibility. To be free is to stand apart, to bear the uncertainty of choosing for yourself. And most people, they hate that. They would rather have a guardian, someone else, to make those decisions for them. Immanuel Kant called this self-imposed immaturity. He said that people prefer to remain children, handing decisions to a guardian because thinking for ourselves is frightening. To be free is to grow up, and too many people prefer the nursery. Isaiah Berlin sharpened it further. He spoke of two kinds of liberty. Negative liberty, which is freedom from interference, no censor, no priest, no boss dictating your choices. And positive liberty, which is the freedom to live the life that you think is best for you. Here's the trick. Authoritarians know how to exploit that tension. They whisper, give up your negative liberty. Hand us the keys and we'll hand you positive liberty instead. We'll give you identity. We'll give you belonging, even the thrill of power. You won't have to shape your own life. We're going to shape it for you. And here is the dangerous seduction. Sometimes surrendering freedom makes you feel powerful. You join the movement, the mob, the uninformed ranks. Suddenly, you have authority over others. That's intoxicating for a while. But what you forget is that by affirming the system that grants you power, you've also affirmed the same system that will put someone else in power over you. Freedom is insurance against that, an insurance policy that you only appreciate when you see the premium that you're paying to someone else. The moment you surrender that, you're not just trading liberty for comfort, you're underwriting your own subjugation. And people rush to accept that deal because it feels lighter than real freedom. It feels like safety, like certainty, like strength. But it is borrowed strength, and it will be collected back. The heavier the freedom, the more it's worth carrying, because the alternative is to be carried until you're crushed. So why do people trade freedom for authority? The answer is as old as fear. Psychologists know the drivers: fear, fatigue, and the craving for order. When the world is uncertain, freedom feels exhausting. Every choice is a burden. Every risk is a weight. Obedience, it feels like rest. Authority, it feels like clarity. It's the comfort of childhood. Someone else making the rules, someone else taking responsibility. To obey is to regress. To hand your choices back to the parent that you secretly wish were still in charge and still responsible. History is littered with examples. In the book of Samuel, the Israelites beg for a king. They had judges, prophets, even direct appeals to God, but that wasn't enough. They wanted the comfort of a crown. God warns them, a king will tax you. A king will conscript you, God warns, enslave you even. Still, the Israelites shout, give us a king. Freedom was heavy. authority was light. Or think of Athens, the birthplace of democracy, the city that prided itself on liberty. In their fear, they voted themselves into ruin, empowering demagogues who promised safety and glory only to lead them into disaster. The mob cheered its way into a cage. The story, it repeats across the ages though. Imagine an economy in collapse. Jobs vanish, savings evaporate. Into the chaos strides a strong man with simple answers, decisive action, promises of order. So people cheer. They feel safe again, but the bargain is always the same. Trade your liberty for comfort. Trade your burden for a leash. And here's the sting. Authoritarian bargains always feel good at first. They provide relief, a sense of belonging, even a taste of power over others. But it's hollow. Because once you've handed over your freedom, you've affirmed the very system that can turn against you. Freedom, it disciplines fear by forcing you, by making you grow up. Authority indulges fear by treating you like a child. One path is heavy but honest, and the other is light, but it's false. That is the temptation of authority, a cheap piece bought at the cost of your future, of yourself. Isaiah Berlin gave us a warning. Positive liberty, the freedom to live your true self, it can be hijacked. All it takes is someone in power to declare that we know who you really are. We know what you really want. And if you resist, well, we'll force you to be free. That is the cruel genius of authoritarian logic. Coercion is rebranded as liberation. Chains are relabeled as safety, and people who are exhausted by the burdens of liberty accept that disguise, sometimes even knowing it's just a disguise. Look at Germany. In 1933, the Reichstag passed the Enabling Act, not imposed by Hitler alone, but voted in by Parliament. In their fear and in their fatigue, they surrendered democracy itself, not abolished. They didn't destroy it, they surrendered it. And the justification, unity, order, the true freedom of a people guided by destiny. Or look at the Soviet Union, where every invasion was called a liberation. Eastern Europe was told it was being freed into censorship, into purges and tanks on every corner. Look at Prague in 1968, or Hungary in the 50s, East Germany in the 50s. The rhetoric was always the same. We're not oppressing you, we're forcing you to be your authentic self. And here's the principle. The more that you let someone define freedom for you, the less you have of either form of liberty. Negative liberty disappears first, your protection from interference. But then positive liberty follows, because your true self is now whatever the ruler says it is. Authoritarians, they don't just take power, they twist liberty itself into being the weapon of control. They don't say, obey us or die. They say, obey us and live as your true self. And people, they cheer because it feels like freedom. But the irony is sharp. The moment you let someone else define your freedom, you've lost it entirely. You're not liberated, you're managed. Here's the real cost of obedience. Once you hand away judgment, you've handed away dignity itself. Hannah Arendt saw this in the trial of Adolf Eichmann. He wasn't a monster out of myth and legend, he was just a bureaucrat. A man who balanced ledgers and filed forms and sent trains, but he sent them to Auschwitz. He spoke in cliches, he defended himself with paperwork. Arendt called this the banality of evil. Atrocities committed not with fire and fury, but with simple rubber stamps. The moral cost is devastating. To yield judgment is to erase virtue. You no longer choose, you merely comply. And a person without choice isn't moral, they're furniture. And the evidence? It is everywhere. Solomon Asch showed in the 1950s that people will agree that two lines of obviously different lengths are equal or identical just because everyone else in the room says they are. About a third of the time, perception itself buckles under social pressure. The bystander effect, it tells us the same story. In emergencies, the more people present, the less likely anyone is to actually take action, to help. Everyone waits for someone else. Responsibility, it dissolves into the crowd. And when we look beyond the lab, the pattern gets even darker. At Abu Ghraib prison in 2004, American soldiers humiliated and tortured detainees, not fringe sadists, but ordinary military reservists. They later said they felt that it was expected, sanctioned. It was part of the group's functioning logic. That is the price of obedience in the real world. Conscience is erased in the name of loyalty. And here's the sting. The hardest obedience isn't to tyrants, it's to your own team, to the nods in the room, to the loyalty oath that asks you to swallow doubt. That is how judgment dies. The social cost is immense. Once obedience becomes reflex, societies stop thinking, they stop resisting, and they drift step by step, nod by nod, into horrors that no individual, no one person would have chosen on their own. That is the price of obedience, not just your freedom, but yourself. And when enough people pay that price, civilization itself, well, it crumbles into oblivion. The hardest act of freedom then isn't shouting at your enemies, it's standing against your own side when it drifts toward fear and tyranny. In the 1950s, America wasn't ruled by a dictator, it was ruled by an atmosphere. Senator Joseph McCarthy wielded fear like a weapon, accusing citizens left and right of being traitors, communists, infiltrators. And the public, exhausted and afraid, they nodded along. Careers were destroyed, reputations were ruined, and silence, it spread. Enter Edward R. Murrow, a journalist with everything to lose. On national television in 1954, he did what most people wouldn't, what they felt they couldn't. He called McCarthy's tactics dangerous to freedom and democracy itself. He stood from inside the system on the airwaves of CBS, and he told Americans that their own fear, that was the real problem. He warned, we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. He reminded viewers that obedience to hysteria, it wasn't patriotism, it was surrender. Murrow wasn't universally applauded. He was accused of bias, disloyalty, even betrayal. That's the paradox of dissent. When you confront your own tribe, they don't call it courage, they call it treason. They call you a traitor. But history was on his side. McCarthy fell soon after, undone not by an enemy, but by truth spoken from within.
Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
Murrow proved that liberty survives only when individuals choose conscience over comfort, even against their own allies, even when their own side prefers silence. That is the true weight of freedom, not flag waving when the crowd is cheering, but standing alone when your neighbors call you disloyal. It is thankless, it is dangerous, and it is necessary. It is the only thing, indeed, that keeps liberty alive. Choosing authority over freedom is often dressed up as maturity. it's pragmatism, it's realism. In truth, it's the opposite. Again, it is regression. It's the politics of the nursery. Like children, we look for parents to solve our problems, to shield us from risk, to spare us the burden of choice, of making our own decisions. But that bargain is more than childish, it is ruinous. Morally, it's the abdication of conscience. The moment that you let someone else decide what is right, you've surrendered the very core of individuality, of being human. You're no longer a moral agent, you're simply a mouthpiece. And when evil follows, you will say, just like Eichmann did, I was only following orders. Ethically, it makes you complicit. You may not sign the decree, you may not swing that brutal club, but your silence, your obedience, it is the oxygen that keeps that fire burning. The tyrant cannot act alone. Authority requires consent, even when it's manufactured through fear. To obey is to participate. And practically, the record speaks for itself. Obedience breeds stagnation. Societies that crush liberty in the name of comfort, they rot from within. Corruption flourishes, innovation dies, and decay sets in. Authoritarian bargains always deliver the same inheritance: abuse, decline, and collapse. Freedom is heavy, but authority is deadly, and the cost of choosing it is everything worth having: conscience, dignity, progress, and the future itself. Freedom isn't protected by speeches, though. It's protected by habits, by the way you train yourself not to hand over the keys before anyone even asks. Timothy Snyder, in his book on tyranny, calls it the first rule: do not obey in advance. Authoritarianism thrives not on force, but on anticipation. People censor themselves before they're even told to do so. They align with power before power actually demands it. And the tyrant doesn't need chains when obedience is simply volunteered. So here's how you keep yourself free. First, don't obey in advance. Catch yourself when you soften your opinion, when you trim your words or act smaller just to please a bigger authority. That is the first act of surrender. So refuse it. Say what you mean while you still can. Next, run the loyalty test. Ask, am I defending this because it's right, it's true, or because it's my side? Tyranny always disguises itself as team spirit. If loyalty trumps truth, then you have already compromised. Third, practice small, little acts of disobedience, of defiance. Say no in lower stakes moments. Refuse the pointless meeting. Question the lazy assumption. These are drills. If you can't resist when it's easy, then don't kid yourself. You're never going to be able to resist when real things are on the line, the stakes are high, and it's dangerous. Number 4, I want you to keep a conscience ledger. Once a week, jot down one moment that you traded judgment for comfort. Don't wallow, just note that it happened. Note the cost. Awareness builds resilience, and authoritarianism feeds on people who lie to themselves first. Finally, number 5, build cross allegiances. Talk beyond your echo chamber, read outside of your circle. Tyranny thrives in homogeneity, and freedom, it thrives in variety. You see, these aren't heroic gestures, they're disciplines. The point isn't to live in constant rebellion. The point is to keep your judgment awake and functioning, because freedom, it is lost one small surrender at a time, and it's preserved in exactly the same way. Snyder's warning is blunt. Tyranny arrives when people obey before they must. Don't give it that gift. Don't obey in advance. The rule to remember here is freedoms surrendered are never returned. Freedom is heavy. It demands effort. It means living with uncertainty, responsibility, risk, but giving it up, that is heavier still, because once it is gone, it does not come back. Freedom surrendered are never returned. Think carefully about what freedom really is, what it means to you. It isn't just an abstract principle. It's not some flag in the wind. It is options. It is opportunities. It is the ability to choose between paths, to adjust, to improvise, to make tomorrow different from today. With freedom, your life has doors that you can open, and knowledge that if one closes, another can be tried. Without freedom, there are no doors. There are only corridors, long hallways, fixed, narrow, predetermined. What once were opportunities become obligations. Authority doesn't give you options, it gives you assignments. And when you surrender liberty, you agree to live by someone else's schedule, someone else's itinerary. That is the hidden cost of obedience, not just the loss of rights, but the loss of possibilities. A society without freedom stagnates because its people are confined to tracks they did not choose. An individual without freedom shrinks into routine. They're stripped of agency. They are robbed of discovery. And here's the paradox. Most people will beg for guardians. They will plead for leaders to plan their lives, to remove the weight of choice. They will call this comfort, even strength, but it is comfort in a cage. It is strength borrowed on a leash. You're going to know better. You're going to shoulder the burden of freedom, not because it is light, but because you understand what the true price of the alternative is. You remember that options are oxygen, that opportunities are life itself, and that the moment that you trade those for certainty, you've accepted a future written by someone else's hand. Freedom is heavy, but the weight of surrender is heavier still, and the heaviest burden is not carrying your freedom. It's living without it.